Okay, so shall we get down to it?
Sure. So um, I guess we can start with let's just start with a map of what we know today to be Europe. Um, so just here. Sorry. I have to, okay. So this do, are can you let me know when you can kind of see it or when?
Yeah, I'm just gonna bring it up.
Sure.
Voila.
Okay. So that's that's what we kind of know to be um, Europe today. And I just want to, just so we just, I mean, I don't know exactly who's watching, but we have, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland right beside it. Now, the reason why some of this is important is because I want to just point out again Poland's vicinity to Ukraine. A couple of these will come into play in what I'm talking about. And then again, this area of Ukraine, Crimea is here, in case people don't know where or what Crimea is. And then this would be Eastern Ukraine, and this is Western Ukraine, and there is a Central Ukraine, but I'll show you on some other maps. Now, this map, I believe, no, another way, sorry. This map scared a whole bunch of people. So this was um, Lukashenko, who is the leader of Belarus, and with this map, and basically people were saying, "Oh, Putin is going to divide Ukraine into all of these parts." Really, what this looks like to me is a history lesson.
Okay.
Um, it doesn't look to me like a war strategy at all. This is just how Eastern Europe understands the Ukraine. They have to understand it in these parts. This top section where he has his stick pointed would be an area called Volhynia. This was previously a part of Poland. Just below that, to the left, would be an area I would refer to as Galicia. Galicia had a different formation at one point, and it's really important. And there's a really interesting link between Galicia and Canada.
No.
That link would be Chrystia Freeland, and I'll get into that. So, but let me show you a map of. Let me just see how close we are to southern map. I'm gonna have to scroll through this a bit. So, let me go this way. That's some information. I have lots of maps here. No, I'm stuck on Christia. Okay, so again, these are these two areas. So we have um, that woolen, so that would be, and then Galicia would be this part at the bottom. Okay, and again, the language in these areas have a lot of Polish influence in it and have been Polish at one point, and Hungarian and Austrian. And so I will, but this would be Volhynia and Galicia, is what I want to call them for clarity, as
Okay.
opposed to saying Ukraine. When you say Ukraine, to some people, there are actually Russians living today, or Ukrainian Russians. I have to, again, specify. Ukrainian Russians living in Ukraine that when you ask them what they think about Ukraine or the Ukraine crisis, they'll actually ask you or tell you, I don't care, Ukraine isn't a real country.
Yeah.
These are people that live in the country. Like I wouldn't even dream of somebody asking me about Canada and me responding with, I don't care, Canada isn't even a real country. I mean, with all of the problems that I've seen in Canada, even with our repatriation under Pierre Trudeau and the Charter of Rights, and also, I still wouldn't say Canada wasn't a real country. So that kind of shows the issues that we've been having and um, how long this has been a problem and how this has never really been resolved in people's minds, even the people that live there. So this is Galicia. Now, Kiev right now. Okay, so this is the Dieppe.
Oh,
The
can we take a
river.
quick pause?
Sure.
Why have all the lefties started saying Kiev instead of Kiev? Is that the Ukrainian language and they're trying to show solidarity?
It can always have been again, because of the history on this. It can be pronounced both ways, and it was called Kiev Rus. So, and what I mean by it was, I mean I mean this. Let me see if I can. Hang on. This this is a map of Russia from the year 800. Okay, and this was what
800?
Russia looked in the year 800, 882, all the way to 1240, and with patches taken out even beyond that. Okay, so this country that we know, or we would call Russia today, this country was called Kiev Rus. Kiev was the capital city of Russia.
All right.
This is something that people don't understand. They're saying Russia is taking Kiev as if Russia and Kiev have never had any relation, when it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of czars. So many Vladimirs, so many, have come from Kiev, have been in control of Kiev as the Russian monarchy on like all of their czars for hundreds of years. I mean, they were all stationed in Kiev. This was Kiev Rus. That was the name of the country for hundreds of years.
Does the going this far back? Does this zone this would be pretty much purely the Rus people?
Yes,
Right.
this is what this was, and everything kind of to the, see where Crimea is. Okay, at that point in the 1200s, Crimea was populated by Tartars. So that would have been more like
Crimea
the
is the lower
kind of people
south
that are,
zone.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was, and then we had, this goes on until, I mean, there's a Crimean War, and again, I could
We'll
to
get
do
there.
the
We'll
whole
get there.
history. Yeah, we don't. I don't know that we can do every piece of this history,
No.
but I think it's very, very important to know that this country was once called Kiev Rus. I don't, and so to understand that Kiev, Odessa, these places were always a part of Russia,
Yeah.
and that's not. I don't know that that'll happen in the future. I don't know that, because again, that's fine, and 1200 is a very long time ago.
Yeah.
But
And things have just been balkanized back and forth, jumping
but
between.
it hasn't. But it had. So I guess when I was okay, so when I was about 17, I did a world history course. It was the first real world history course that I ever did. I was homeschooled, thankfully, and I got to do a real decent world history course. And I remember when I finished that course thinking, wow, like yesterday, it was like I was a puppy that didn't have a sense of time. If somebody leaves for a minute and comes back, I think, it's the end of the world, and oh my gosh, and whatever. So I had no sense of where I was in time. And so I think that the reason why history is important is because it gives you a sense of how long things really are and how the progression goes. So again, we can't go into all of it, but
No.
when you think about generations, it becomes important. And then when we get to exactly how young Ukraine is, because yeah, it's really not that long ago.
Yeah.
Even though it
Yeah.
sounds like it's long ago, because there was a continued progression.
So
Crimea and
so let
all the area like around around Kiev still stayed Russian,
mhm.
for very many years.
So I sidetracked you pretty hard just with that
Sure, I know.
Kiev question. So we'll go back to the slide you were on, and we'll pick up because you had a general progression
So
going
this
there.
is Galicia. And again, Volhynia above it, Galicia, and if you can see, Galicia was part of Poland and part of Ukraine, and this was a gift, really. Basically, what happened was, so I want to show you what Galicia looked like. Galicia had Krakow, which we know is Poland, and Lviv, which is to the west of Kiev. It's one of the major cities that is to the west. And this is um, now, so the issue here, the issue with this area is because this area was the area that was in charge by a gentleman that is Chrystia Freeland's not great, just grandfather. Her grandfather, who at one point had he had a job, doing propaganda, and then was moved by the Germans to this area, and he actually was in charge. He was in charge of Galicia. So Chrystia Freeland is fluent in Ukrainian. Her family is Ukrainian. She did end up going to Russia to learn Ukrainian. And I think part of the reason why you'd want to be learning Ukrainian, even though you already know Ukrainian, well, there's a few reasons. One is because her Ukrainian would have been there's a Polish dialect there, and it's very possible she has the wrong dialect.
Oh.
And if you want to be metropolitan, to put it lightly, you might want to improve your dialect. The other reason is the connections, and she did a lot while she was in Russia. She did so much while she was in Russia that she's banned from Russia. Chrystia Freeland can no longer enter Russia. She was involved in political activity while studying over there. And again, her grandfather, when people say her grandfather was a Nazi, her grandfather was a Nazi. He was not just any Nazi, he was a very powerful Nazi. And when you see Chrystia Freeland in those pictures holding Nazi flags, it is beyond disturbing.
She knows what she's doing. There's
Yeah,
no,
she is not
there's
like
no,
people.
there was
Yes,
just some people there with a flag, and I was just standing there. She's like loving this. She knows exactly what she's touching there.
right. And
Yeah.
when the other thing is, when you hear people in Russia saying that people are being killed by Nazis, they're not. We're getting, oh, they're neo-Nazis. No, these are actually original Nazis. These are not neo-Nazis. These are not skinheads. These are National Socialists.
We're living in the time where it's, as all of us have been warning the left, if you keep on calling us Nazis all day long just because we want border control or whatever, and call me a Nazi because of that, you're watering down the word. So now, but maybe one wonders if it almost isn't all on purpose, because when
Right.
Putin says now we're actually going to denazify the Ukraine, which means the actual Nazis that have been there unbroken since World War II, we want to get rid of them. They take it as rhetoric. It just sounds like, oh, Putin's just talking rhetoric like we do. But as you say, this is literal, actual Nazis.
Yeah. Now, again, the Nazi was the National Workers' Party, right? Like they were the National Socialist Workers' Party. That's what Nazi stands for. So everybody in their mind, when they hear Nazi, all they think of is a bunch of blonde anti-Semites. And that's not what Hitler actually ran on. And he was elected by a landslide. He was elected. He wasn't. He was, the charismatic leader of his day, without mentioning names and giving illustrations of other people that I think are Hitler. But anyway, but yeah, he was a charismatic leader, and he got himself elected based on socialist policies. And I've looked at different maps of who voted for him, and I've heard both sides of the story. I've seen maps where it looks like, Catholics didn't vote for Hitler. I've read a lot of articles, again, because of my background, on how the church really supported him while he was running. So, there is evidence that the rhetoric of Hitler matched the social justice rhetoric, and a lot of good people promoted him on his socialism. How Nazis end up on the right, I guess. I'm so.
It's been a strange.
Oh,
It's something that people
it upsets
debate
me
to
to
this
no
day.
end because
You
it
know.
is completely Soviet rhetoric. It's all Soviet rhetoric. The fact there is no there is nothing about conserving uh, principles, which is what being on the right is about. Um, that involves anti-Semitism or involves taking control of other people, or this is all stuff that socialists and communists do all the time. They need to in order to create a socialist society, you need some sort of centralized control, and that's left wing.
That's the socialist side of the national parts, and the only difference that seems to be drawn historically is perhaps, well, maybe two: the race element and then the corporatist element. But now that we're living inside of it now, I feel like we're living
Hmm.
inside early 30s, mid
Hmm.
30s Germany right now, and we're seeing how this happens, and it happens from the left. It happens
Hmm.
from them forbidding modes of thought, from them controlling media, from
Hmm.
them controlling speech, not from the right, who generally want to be left alone and get to work, you know?
Yeah, no. So while we're on Christia Freeland, um, I wanted to mention a couple things. That she is currently working on a biography of George Soros.
Oh,
It's called, yeah, right, and it's called "The Rise of the New Global Super Rich and the Fall of Everyone Else."
a good title.
Right, and this is a quote. This is this is her. So she's saying she wrote this. This is her writing. One of Soros's intellectual hallmarks is an ability to quickly size up who wins in such a scenario. This is a useful habit of mind if you run a hedge fund. It also happens to be a very Eastern European way of thinking. Vladimir Lenin famously insisted that the key question of any political agenda was who, whom, as in who is doing what to whom. This is a person that admires Lenin and Soros, and it has a grandfather that's a Nazi and has been kicked out of Russia for political activity. And she is our deputy prime minister.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, a little bit worrisome to say the least. Sorry, there. These are, might be getting. Just come back here. This is also a quote. This is here. During her time at Harvard, she visited the Soviet Union as an exchange student to study Ukrainian. Although she was already fluent in the language, while there she attracted the attention of the KGB, which tagged her with the codename Frida, and Soviet papers who attacked her as a foreign meddling in their internal affairs over her contacts with Ukrainian activists. So if you think she's spontaneously going down to this protest in Toronto, yeah, there's nothing spontaneous at all about what she's doing. And it actually reminds me of the French Revolution. I know this is totally out, but these ideas that the left gives us in our history books about spontaneous revolutions. I've never seen a spontaneous revolution. Maybe the trucker. I mean, it's like you don't. The left has never presented one. There's always lawyers involved. There's always propagandists involved. There's always, um, I think, up till I think up till up till I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I think up till the convoy, I've never really seen a spontaneous revolution.
Both sides will convince themselves when they're whipping up the rhetoric that there will be a spontaneous revolt of the people to whatever side they want, and that's Marxism to a T. They still believe that crap.
Hmm.
You reach a point, and the people will spontaneously revolt and usher in the dictatorship of the proletariat, or on the right, will do some sanctions, and then the people will spontaneously uprise against the person, their leader that we've decided is a dictator, and everything will be fine. Iraq and Yugoslavia come to mind for that.
Hmm.
And it never happens. You're right. It never
No,
happens.
Marx was wrong about a lot of things. He also thought capitalism would eventually implode, and then he realized that he had to actually do work to take it down because it wasn't actually, it has this horrible tendency of correcting itself when it does something wrong, and so it's never going away. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they're not. I don't know. They don't have a good grasp of reality, I think, is the problem. So I kind of do want to go back to the history a little bit more, where um, because okay, again, ancient history is great, but then how did we get to here? So I'm just trying to see here. I'll go. Sorry, the share screen thing is it's all brand new to me, this app, so I'm just trying
You bet. No sweat there. Hey to everybody. The other Jay has joined us on the channel, and Mrs. Other J.
to.
We've all met before during the Freedom Convoy and in a couple broadcasts since then. How you guys doing out there?
We're good. Sorry, was muted.
No sweat. We're just waiting for Zeruda to get her pictures going again. Any trucker news you guys heard?
I've been well, I mean the three main ones that I've been following are still in jail, so
Yeah.
they have court dates on Monday, so I mean hopefully they let them out or at least on bail. I mean they're
Well,
crazy.
I hope not. Their charge is very serious. Mischief can't we can't allow mischief in a dominion like Canada.
I mean I swear like murderers get out on bail like faster.
How you doing, Zeruda?
I'm okay. I did want to say something else about Galicia while I was here, but I
Okay,
will
great.
have to end the share screen and kind of like come back in with
That's
another
good. You get set up.
thing. Um, but
Does
again, we
Russia
were
have a
talking about,
central bank?
yeah, I have. We were talking about how Christia Freeland's grandfather was in charge of this area. This is again for those tuning in now. Galicia. I'm referring to Western Ukraine in two parts: the northern part as Volhynia and the southern part as Galicia. And Galicia was an area in the past, and not like ancient past, but actually just during the World War II, that was controlled by Nazi Germany, and specifically the grandfather of Chrystia Freeland was in charge of that area. And I just um, I just want to read here that this the breakup kind of how many, like 45.4% Polish, 42.9% Ukrainian, 10.9% Jewish, and 8% German. That's what that area looked like. It was more, there were more Polish in the area than Ukrainians. There were, um, there were more, basically, there were more, the Ukrainians weren't even the half of the people there. So it's definitely not, even if you want to say um, there's the Ukrainians, and then there's people that are of Russian ethnicity in the East. Even in the West, it wasn't it wasn't that cut and dry. It was actually very few people in the West that were even considered Ukrainian.
Is there an ethnic Ukrainian group? Is there a Uk?
There is an ethnic Ukrainian group at the time of the war. Though those ethnic Ukrainians were still Russian. So remember, Kiev was Russia, and right, we talked about how Russia was Kiev Rus. So that was the capital of Russia at one point. So the people living in Kiev were Russian. So that whole area, even though they spoke Ukrainian, they would have been Russian Orthodox. They would not have been Catholic like the Polish.
Were they the Ukrainian language is it distinct from Russian?
Yes, it is different. Russian and Ukrainian are two different languages. But even the people speaking those languages are different. So I'm going to end the share screen, and I'm going to pull up some maps that have the language breakup. Okay.
Great. Welcome everybody joining. Northern Star, who else didn't we shout out? Melanik, hey. Welcome everybody coming in. Anybody come over here from the Zeruda crowd, from the Rinkos Girl crowd? Good to see ya. I know we saw a new guy, the King of Ruckus. Great, wonderfully controversial username. New subscriber here. By all means, look through the old videos. What were you going to say?
What exactly about that banner Christina Freeland was holding made it a Nazi banner?
I'm sure we'll get there. It's the red-black, and it's aligned with the modern neo-Nazis over there.
Yeah, whatever the slogan on it was must have been, well, it wasn't English, whatever it was.
Yeah, it was all Cyrillic and weird, but like especially with what Zeruda just told us, I was willing to go she was just at that thing because she's left wing and supporting Ukraine and the narrative, and people are like, hey, take a picture with us, you know. It's kind of like how the person got Trudeau to sign the Nazi flag famously, you know. So I thought maybe that was the situation, but with Zeruda telling us that she's like basically a Ukraine operative that got kicked out of Russia for working for the Ukraine, she has to know exactly what those colors mean and exactly what that flag means when she's holding the motherfucker as well.
Right.
So there can't be any kind of, you know, claim of innocence. But why don't we get to say that at the trucker rally? Right? There's a guy on the balcony at the Chateau Laurier with a Nazi flag. Therefore, I'm a Nazi.
Yeah.
What about her? Freeze her bank account.
Yeah.
Zombie Potato. All right, even more controversial nickname. Some or majority of the information presented is just wrong. It's like a history lesson from someone who's educated in Russia with its twisted events of history. Putin's history. Is this the troll you invited? Good to have you. We love trolls. Bring it on. We want to hear both sides of all arguments.
I have more history, so if you want to look at this map. Okay, yep. And so this is actually straight newspaper from April of 1939 newspaper. So this is not a Russian newspaper. This is an American newspaper.
Okay.
And this is reporting. I don't know. Can you see it?
Sorry, I have to do it manually. I keep forgetting.
It's actually a New York Times article. Okay, so that's probably as benign. Yeah, and if you want to open it up, and I'll read what it says because I know it's small. I don't know. Maybe I can zoom in here. Okay, so what we have here is, you see Volhynia up here. This has now been divided. So this area, I don't know if a lot of people saw, there is a PPC candidate who did a stream he's out of Whippy, and he did something on this topic, and he is from Hungary, and so he was saying how also the Hungarians were taken and sucked into Ukraine. At this point, they're not. This would be here, this little area here, Bessarabia. That's what he would be talking about. This was Hungary. And at the time of the March Revolution, Bessarabia was allowed to stay in Hungary. But the Soviets had decided that they were going to absorb all this other stuff, attach it to to what was already in Russia. So Poland, so basically taking Poland from the Nazis and putting it into Ukraine. And this is the first time we actually ever hear about Ukraine. This is in 1939. And this is what the New York Times is writing. This is not my words, and this is not Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
This says, out of the chaos into which Russia fell after the revolution of last March, a new nation now emerges. Again, this is New York Times. A new nation now emerges. The Ukrainian People's Republic. Okay, so that is the first time where we have the Ukrainian People's Republic. That is the first time where you have this configuration, which at the time still doesn't include Crimea.
This is 1939?
1939.
Right. And this
Before
doesn't get
that-
really decided until after the war, right?
Right, and after the war, after the war, then they add Crimea to this. So Crimea plus this is 40 years old. It's like, it's not 40 years old. It's well, yeah. I mean, it's post,
Yeah.
it's post Reagan.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is no wonder why you can ask a Russian, what do you think about Ukraine, and a Russian Eastern Ukrainian will tell you, Ukraine, that's not even a country.
Yeah.
So why? Okay, so what is this mess here, and who lives here, and what does it look like? So now we're getting to sorry, I can't switch now on this. Oh, because it's zoomed in. Okay, so I want to look at the voting here, so you can kind of see what's going on in the country right now. They had an election. Okay, there was a few elections. There was a 2004 election. And I just want to compare it to the 2010, so you don't think something terrible happened in the world, or some manipulation that happened in just prior to an election, somebody tampering with the election. The Ukraine election in 2004 looked like this. Basically, it's very divided. It's everyone in the East is voting for one person, everyone in the West is voting for another person.
Just purely geographical.
Mhm.
Yes. So, but there are people, and it's not exactly, everyone, but there is a majority. There's a very vast difference. So you can see some areas in the extremes, okay, that are favoring, and the reason why, again, is these people are not Ukrainian. These are Hungarians. They're not Western Ukrainian, or they're not of Polish descent. And so wherever you find these areas that are not of Polish descent, you also find them voting against that bloc.
Yeah.
So you begin to think that somewhere in the heads of these people, this bloc may be dangerous, maybe. Like because it's not just the Eastern, like it's not just, now again, this is purely conjecture on my part, but I don't think that the Eastern Ukrainians think that Nazis were benign. I think a lot of people, especially the ones living in Odessa, who were Russian Jews, would be a little bit more aware of this. Until this Ukraine crisis broke out, I had never met a Russian Jew that had identified as Ukrainian. They had identified as Russian Jew, being from Odessa. Now with all the propaganda, now with everything going on, again, my peers are of a different generation and they haven't done as much history. They're saying things like, my grandmother would have thought X and my grandfather would have, and I'm thinking, I knew your grandfather and I knew your grandmother. I'm pretty sure they would have had a different opinion. I don't think they would have been fooled by Western propaganda. So
we've got someone new here that says, I'm a consumer. Hey, welcome to the channel. Most of the evidence of election tampering is largely conjecture that is unsupported by independent review. Also, faulty election results, legitimately fraud or not, don't justify Russia invading.
Okay, so I want to show you another election map, and that would be this one. And that shows the amount of where Yanukovych got all of his votes from. So you can see, even in the areas where Yanukovych won, there is still a very heavy voting population. It's not just because the map, it's like the Canadian election map, right? I mean, just because Ontario goes, whatever. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's no conservatives in Ontario. Obviously, at the provincial level, we get the conservatives elected. So there's a lot of conservatives in Ontario. The same goes for Ukraine. There are a lot of people voting together with this Eastern Bloc.
Yeah. It's
just not registering because of the election system that they have in place.
Yeah.
So does that look like Russian? I'll go back to the other, but I do have influence. There is evidence of interference on the other side that we can actually see.
I was just getting into that in the Stone documentary, and there were a couple elections. I do believe the 2010 one, and the previous was 2004, I think.
2004, yes.
They in the documentary they said it is a little bit shaky, but I think that the 10 one, I think they said there was no doubt about who won. But that's just their documentary, right? I'm not saying I agree or disagree. But it sounded like the 2004 one sounded like it was much sketchier. And this is to the 10 one is to elect the guy before Zelensky, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was before Zelensky, and it was when and after that election is when you have the coup.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
So and before so they were in the 2010 election, they were voting for Yanukovych. In the 2004, they were also voting for Yanukovych. He lost the 2004 election.
Right.
He won the 2010 election. Again, if there was Russian interference, why did he lose the 2004 election? This problem has been here for a very long time. Again, since the Cold War, pretty much. We are having issues in this area. Chrystia Freeland, she's doing this, in university, right? There's a long run up to this. This is a survey that was done, and these were done in the different oblasts in Ukraine. So an oblast would be like a province or a territory or however. And so you can see the western ones on the top, and as you go east, you can see that they're asking them if they can only be in one economic union, what would they choose? Obviously, the West is going for the European Union. The East is actually answering that they would want to be in the customs union of Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. So there are people that are saying that they would actively want to go, not just that they don't know or they're not sure or they want to be in something else, but there are people that actually want to be with Russia. And you'll notice there is at least a registration for every single oblast, even if it's small. There are people all over the Ukraine that want to be part of Russia.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was a 2004. Okay, so this is the breakup. Again, we've been talking about it kind of all night, but this is the breakup of mostly Ukrainian speaking. You can see there's different languages. These are Russian. This is significant ethnic Russians in the where the yellow has the lines through it. Crimea is definitely majority Russian, but mostly Russian is pretty much everything. Predominantly Ukrainian is this kind of red area, but there's definitely issues here. Okay, now the last thing I think, which is really important to mention in the this whole breakdown of which is east and which is west, and why people would want or feel like they're not part of Ukraine or separated from other people, is it's not just culture. So we talked about culture. We talked about how these two factions actually have totally different religions. They have totally different languages, totally different religions, but they actually have a totally different history because of their relationship with the USSR. So this area was like Kiev, and this whole area here was populated by Cossacks. So this is different than the other word I want to use, which is Bolsheviks. And what people don't remember about Lenin and Stalin is that Lenin and Stalin both were from Georgia. These were people that conquered Russia, right? Like they came in and they were leading as foreigners. They didn't care about the Russian people. And what they did was starve them. They especially starved the Ukrainians. And this history, unfortunately, is quite confused and quite lost because it was rewritten by Hrushevsky. Hrushevsky, who claims to be, again, he's from the West. He supposedly was a Pole. I talked to a Polish person the other day, and he was like, "That's a Pole. That's not a Polish name, Hrushevsky." So this man is the central. So if you're studying Ukrainian history, you're normally studying Hrushevsky, and it's a revisionist, completely revisionist history, and that's a problem. So why don't we just and so basically, when you're getting propaganda, the best thing to do is grab a map, or get some outside, like a look at something. I've had to do that a lot just with looking at this presentation. How if Russia says this, well, okay, let's look at who they were talking about and go from their history. And so grabbing a history from another source.
Mm-hmm.
On this map, you can clearly see Kiev is the first major city at the top where you can see very red, okay? And the red represents the number of deaths from starvation.
Oh, damn.
Whoa.
These people from Kiev to the east were starved by the Bolsheviks. They were starved to death. They were starved. They were deported. And basically there was a mass murder going on in this area. The West was not involved. Volhynia is right here. You can see it south to the south. These oblasts were not involved. They did not suffer the Holodomor. And Ukrainians, and the propaganda is that Ukrainians suffered at the hands of the Russians and would never want to be back with Russia.
Define Holodomor for the chat,
So
please.
Holodomor is the name they give to this specific time from 1929 to 1933, when there was a giant, basically starvation. It was an attack, and they wanted to basically repopulate by killing all of the Cossacks and repopulating them with more Bolsheviks so they could take control of the area.
This ties into them declaring the farmers as elitist landholders and killing them off, and then taking their land and then not farming and destroying that whole process, and everybody starves.
there was all of that. There was and including deportations and yes. Again, so so but again, this is you're when you're living through this, and they were living through this as Russians. They were not living through this as Ukrainians. They had never been Ukrainians before. They're just living on the border, which is where we get the word Ukraine from. So these are people living on the border of Russia that are being starved by Soviets, and 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 then later, after this occurs, are being severed out. So this is occurring between 1929 and 1933, and you can see Crimea is also being starved. They were not severed out in 1939, but all of these other people were severed out of the country after being starved and losing all their livelihoods as Russian citizens. They were now chucked to the side, chopped off by the Soviets, and moved into a country with Nazi Poland.
Right.
Okay, so this is what's going on. And again, this is not Russian propaganda. This is what was published by the New York Times.
Yeah.
So it's very different life experiences of these two halves of the Ukraine.
All of a sudden, the geographical voting differences make a lot of sense.
A lot of sense. So somebody asked me, actually somebody in the chat asked me this. I won't point them out, but they're welcome to identify themselves if they want. But they said to me, I'm personally always against separatism or separatist movements. And I said, okay, imagine it this way. So a lot of us, I know there are some people that are not from Ontario, but imagine Justin Trudeau, as crappy as, he makes Canada. He decides tomorrow so we don't like crappy Canada. We're obviously living in a socialist nation. Okay, so I'm putting Ontarians in this situation. We're living in a socialist nation. Trudeau is the prime minister. As much as we say of Trudeau, he's our prime minister, and this is Canada. Trudeau decides tomorrow that he is going to section off Ontario and attach it to Quebec and give it to one of his lackeys. And now we're living attached to Quebec. And no offense to Quebec, but obviously they have their own culture and they have their own ideas. So what happens to Ukraine when this occurs, that they're sectioned off, is they write up a constitution. And the Constitution of Ukraine states, which would be our constitution in this scenario, we will sign and we will become an independent state. However, we have a clause. The clause is that if our sovereignty is ever threatened, okay, because we don't want to be captured by Nazis, we don't want to be captured by anybody. If our constitution is ever threatened, then Russia will come to our aid. That is written into the constitution. If we were Ontarians and we wrote that into the constitution, okay, you can attach us to Quebec, but if France wants to come and take Quebec, we're not going to France. Canada is going to come to our aid, and we are going to get help.
Yeah.
In American, this is called Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine states that if you enter into our space and you do anything threatening, Cuban Missile Crisis, right? You do anything threatening in our space, we are going to respond. Okay? And so this is Russia's position right now. Somebody has attacked the sovereignty of Ukraine by affecting the Yanukovych position after he was elected, and that triggered the Constitution. The clause in the Constitution that said Russia was supposed to come to their aid. And I will show you now what this looked like. So this is what happened just after. This is Ukraine, and these are the protests. Okay, so 2014, you have these areas, and what we got in Ontario and what we got in Canada was there are protests. This was exactly at the same time as the Arab Spring. No coincidence there. But everybody was just in a freedom movement, and everybody just wanted to just be free. And so there were a bunch of protests about taking over their evil governments and switching them up for people's choice and people's republics. So you would think that if it was the people that wanted to change Yanukovych, so again, this is after an election where he won the election democratically, they want to now change who's in government, and protests flare up. Victoria Nuland is down there. Victoria Nuland is handing out cookies to protesters. Victoria Nuland is the Assistant Secretary of State to Hillary Clinton. Okay, and she, so you have Obama, you have Hillary Clinton as the Secretary of State. She's the Assistant Secretary of State, and she's in charge of European Eurasian relations. And she is down there handing cookies to protesters in Ukraine.
Sorry, my stomach just churned a little bit at having to hear Hillary. The Oliver Stone documentary was just getting into this, and this is November 2013. The protests start, and immediately 3 new television stations pop up, fully funded, that go viral and become massively popular and start encouraging people to come down and protest.
Now, this is, again, the mass protests where they were happening. It was definitely not over. It wasn't even past Kyiv to any significant degree. And it wasn't even all over Western Ukraine, what I would consider still part of Galicia. But definitely the main part of Galicia and Volhynia is where you see government buildings being seized. They go in, they throw elected officials into garbage cans covered in water in the winter.
Ugh.
Yeah. And the world cheers this as a freedom movement. And at the same time, the world was cheering the Arab Spring that was going on down there. And Fox News and CNN were all on the same page for the Arab Spring. And I'm sitting there watching this, scratching my head and saying and asking the same questions I'm asking today. What on earth is happening where the right-wing media and the left-wing media are spouting the exact same rhetoric, and nobody stops to question why are they on the same page all of a sudden when they're normally diametrically opposed? In what world is the media not lying to me? And is not, is everybody all at once thinking the same thing? Like, something is going on, and normally if it's something insidious, then I'm sorry, but the good guys and the bad guys can't be on the same page. that was my thing. Now, I had, I guess, the privilege of growing up in a very conservative house, so I never had this problem of having to wake up, or I was, my parents have been involved in politics. They both came from communist countries, so I heard nothing but, and I didn't understand it when I was growing up. I was a little kid. Mom, why are you always talking about communism? Why is everything about communism? I don't understand. And every conversation she had, and it was always, and I'm like, we're in Canada. There aren't any communists here. And I couldn't see what she was talking about. And my kids are asking me the same thing. Mom, why are you always talking about communism?
We share that background. My father was RCMP Foreign Liaison, which is now known as CSIS, Canadian Security and Intelligence Services, so RCIA. And I lived all over the world, and ended up in Ottawa at the end of kind of his tour. And very much the same thing. I'd be like, Dad, you chill on the commies, all right? Like, doesn't seem that bad to me. I mean, all these old, boomer dads are all just obsessed with the commies. And
yeah.
where is this giant conspiracy, Dad? I mean, come on. And now Now I'm like his age that he was back then, and I'm like, oh my God, they're everywhere.
Yes.
We didn't
Yes.
get them. We didn't get them. We got to get back to work, y'all. Like we missed a bunch. We missed them. We missed them in school. Is where we missed them. Anyway, I don't want to sidetrack you. Keep on going.
No problem. Again, just this is just a little bit more like these areas. Obviously these were the areas won by Yanukovych. These were the areas. So, yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about, I guess, that article, that Constitution of Ukraine. So, the Constitution of Ukraine, you're like, people are might be wondering how you would have a constitution with a clause like that in it. It's very similar, actually, to the NATO's Article 5. And this gets into the next thing I want to talk about, which is what's motivating Russia, right? So what motivated Russia to go into Ukraine? Obviously, my first argument is that Constitution itself. Constitution itself required a response from Russia. And I don't think Hillary Clinton is oblivious to that Constitution. And the reason I say that is because they did the exact same thing that they're doing in Ukraine in the 80s with the Balkans. It's almost identical. And I would go into it, but it's so much the same that it's kind of a waste. It's like we're watching the Balkans all over again.
Yeah.
Except now, if we pay attention, we can see what happened.
Yeah, we had a comment earlier how reminiscent this was of Yugoslavia, and that's very much the thoughts that I've had.
Sorry,
It's all right.
at one point, Bill Clinton was the most hated person in Eastern Europe because he was messing with the constitutions of countries, and he triggered wars. And
just to put on a show.
Well, no, I'm sure there were other reasons. Again, I'd have to go into, but there is a few things going on, and there's basically a NATO expansion that's going on there, but I don't think it's that benign. John Mearsheimer, he kind of goes at it as this is kind of just America trying to spread democracy to the world. And they know that if they win these allies, then those allies will be on their side, and they get a win-win of putting in democracy and getting an ally. I think it's a little bit more sinister because it's only happening with Biden and Clinton's, and we're finding, it's not like I'm making stuff up. We all saw the connection between Biden's son and Ukraine. This is not even at the level of conspiracy theory. We know this. We know that they're dealing. Oh, and uranium or whatever. They have all the cover-ups and we fired that guy before we made the agreement. Well, you fired him before because you knew you were going to make the agreement, and then you fired him before you could make the agreement, so he wouldn't be involved in the agreement. That's not fooling anybody.
All right. So we're going to play a game?
So this is my quote. So who do we think said this? I guess I'll read it, and then which global leader do you think said this?